Today we're travelling back to April 1933 to spend 24 hours on a small farm in the Oklahoma panhandle during one of the worst environmental and economic disasters in American history. This is the Dust Bowl, a catastrophe that combined ecological collapse with economic devastation to destroy an entire way of life and to force millions of people from their homes. The farm we're visiting belongs to the Henderson family. They've worked this land for 3 generations since Tom Henderson's grandfather claimed it during the land run of 1889. For decades, this was good land, productive, profitable, the foundation of a comfortable life. But that's over now. The topsoil is gone, blown away by wind and drought. The economy has collapsed. The bank is foreclosing. And today, as a massive dust storm approaches, the Henderson family will make a decision that millions of other families are making across the Great Plains. Whether to stay and fight for land that might already be lost, or to pack up everything and join the Great Migration west to California and Oregon. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Are you comfortable? Good. Then let's go back to Oklahoma, 1933, to a world that's coming apart. It's April 14th, 1933. The date isn't particularly significant. There will be worse dust storms later, including the famous Black Sunday, exactly 2 years from now. But it's a day like many others in this terrible spring. The sky has been hazy for days. The air tastes like dirt. Every surface in the house is covered with a fine layer of dust that reappears within hours of being cleaned. The wind never stops, and it carries with it the powdered remains of what used to be topsoil. The sun isn't up yet, but Tom Henderson is already awake. He's 42 years old, a third-generation farmer, and he's lying in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind. The wind has become the soundtrack of his life, a constant, maddening presence that never ceases, that drives people slowly crazy with its relentlessness. It's not a dramatic howling wind like you get in a storm. It's a steady, persistent wind that blows day after day, week after week, month after month, wearing away at everything. The land, the buildings, the crops, and eventually the people themselves. Tom can hear his father coughing in the next room. The old man is 68 and the dust is destroying his lungs. Everyone coughs now. It's impossible not to, with dust in the air constantly. You breathe it, eat it, taste it, feel it grating between your teeth. You tie wet cloths over your face at night, stuff rags around windows and doors, but the dust still gets in. It's so fine that it passes through any barrier. People joke grimly that the only thing that doesn't leak dust is a glass jar with a rubber seal, and even then you're not sure. Tom rises carefully, trying not to wake his wife Mary, though he knows she's probably already awake. Nobody sleeps well anymore. He dresses in the dark, work clothes that were clean yesterday morning but are already grey with dust. Everything is grey with dust. The whole world has turned the colour of ash. He walks through the house in the pre-dawn darkness, navigating by memory. The house is small, 4 rooms, simple frame construction, painted white once, but the paint has been sand-blasted away by years of wind and dust. His grandfather built a dugout when he first claimed this land, then replaced it with a small house, which Tom's father expanded and which Tom himself improved in the 1920s when times were good and farming was profitable. Now it's just a house slowly being buried by dust like everything else. In the kitchen, Tom lights a kerosene lamp. They still have kerosene, though they're using it sparingly. Money is desperately tight. He pumps water from the indoor hand pump, one of the improvements he made in 28, before everything went wrong, and splashes his face. The water tastes strongly of minerals and has a faint alkali smell. The well is 180 feet deep, drilled at enormous expense 5 years ago when the shallower well went dry. Now even this deep well is producing less water than it should. The water table is dropping as the drought continues year after year. Tom looks at his reflection in the small mirror above the sink. He looks old. 10 years ago, people said he looked young for his age. Now he looks older than 42. His face is weathered and lined. His skin has the greyish tint that comes from constant dust exposure, and his eyes have the exhausted, haunted look of a man watching everything he's worked for slowly die. He remembers, and he tries not to remember but can't help it, what this place was like when he was a boy. His father grew wheat on 320 acres, and it was good wheat, tall and golden, heads heavy with grain. They harvested 20 bushels per acre in good years, sometimes more. The land was rich, black topsoil several feet deep in places, built up over thousands of years of prairie grass growing and dying and decomposing. When you ploughed it, the earth turned over in rich, dark chunks that smelled alive. That topsoil is gone now, blown away. It took 10,000 years to build and 20 years to destroy. Tom knows, everyone knows, though they didn't understand it at the time, that they destroyed it themselves. The farmers, the very people who depended on the land, killed it through ignorance and greed. It started with World War I. Wheat prices soared because Europe needed food, and American farmers could supply it. The government encouraged farmers to plant more wheat. Plant fence row to fence row, they said. Wheat will win the war. So farmers ploughed up the native prairie grass that had held the soil in place for millennia and planted wheat instead. And in the teens and early 20s, when rainfall was good, it worked. The wheat grew, prices stayed high, and farmers made money. They bought more land, bigger tractors, better equipment. They went into debt to expand, confident that wheat prices would stay high and rain would keep falling. Then both stopped. Wheat prices collapsed in the late 20s as European production recovered and global supply exceeded demand. The stock market crashed in 1929, destroying the economy. And in 1930 the rain stopped falling. Not completely, there's been some rain, enough to torment farmers with hope, but not nearly enough. And with the native prairie grass gone, ploughed under and replaced with wheat, there was nothing to hold the soil when the drought came and the wind started blowing. The dust storm started in 1931. At first they were occasional events, almost novelties. Children played in the drifting dust, but they got worse and more frequent. By 1932, dust storms were common, and in 1933, they're constant. The soil that took thousands of years to build, that farmers destroyed in decades of careless ploughing, is now blowing away to Kansas, to Missouri, to Illinois, even to the Atlantic Ocean. Ships hundreds of miles at sea report dust falling on their decks. The land is simply disappearing into the sky. Tom walks outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The air is thick and hazy even without an active dust storm. Visibility is maybe half a mile. The stars are dimmed by the dust hanging in the atmosphere. The wind is blowing steadily from the southwest at perhaps 15 miles per hour. Not strong enough to be alarming, but strong enough to keep the dust moving, keep it in the air, keep it from ever settling. He walks to the barn, 40 yards from the house, a journey he could make blindfolded but now requires care because dust drifts can shift overnight, creating new obstacles. The barn is in poor shape. He can't afford repairs, and honestly he's not sure it's worth repairing. They have 2 horses left. They sold the other 4 last year when they couldn't afford to feed them. They have 1 milk cow, down from a herd of 6. They have chickens, maybe 30 left from a flock that used to number over 100. The livestock represent the last of their capital, the final reserves they're burning through to survive. The horses whinny when he enters. They're hungry. Everything is hungry. The horses need grain, but grain costs money they don't have, so he's been feeding them increasingly poor quality hay that he can barely afford. The cow needs grain too, and her milk production has dropped because she's not getting enough nutrition. The chickens are supposed to forage for themselves, but there's nothing to forage. The dust has killed the insects and buried the plant life, so he's feeding them grain too, grain he can't afford, watching his savings disappear into feeding animals he might have to sell or slaughter soon anyway. He feeds the horses first, measuring out the grain carefully, making the dwindling supply last as long as possible. The horses eat desperately, knowing the portions are too small. He waters them from buckets he fills at the pump. The automatic water has stopped working when the pipes got clogged with dust. Then he milks the cow, getting perhaps 2/3 of what she used to produce, the milk thin and with a faint dusty taste despite his best efforts to keep everything clean. By the time he finishes, the sky's beginning to lighten. Dawn comes slowly here, the sun rising over a landscape that looks like the surface of the moon. Where there used to be fields of wheat, there are now fields of dust and dried stubble. The fences are half buried in drifts. The few trees still alive are skeletal, their branches stripped bare by the abrasive wind. The windmill, which used to pump water for the stock tank, stands motionless, because the mechanism is clogged with dust and they can't afford to repair it. Tom stands looking at what used to be his wheat field. This should be planting season. In normal years, he'd be preparing to plant spring wheat, working the soil, feeling optimistic about the coming harvest. But there's no point in planting. Even if rain came, and it won't, there's barely any topsoil left to support crops. What's there is so depleted and damaged that it would take years of rest and restoration to recover. Years they don't have, and recovery techniques they don't know. Some neighbours have already left. The Morrison place to the east has been abandoned for 6 months. The bank foreclosed, but they haven't bothered to take possession because the land is worthless now. The house sits empty, windows broken, door hanging open, slowly being buried by dust. The Turner family to the west left last month, heading to California. They just walked away from everything, the land, the house, the equipment they couldn't sell, and drove west in a loaded-down truck, joining the thousands of refugees fleeing the Dust Bowl. Tom knows he should do the same. The rational decision is to leave, to give up on this land and try to start over somewhere else. But this is his land. His grandfather fought for it in the land run, literally raced against other settlers to claim this quarter section. His father built it into a successful farm. Tom himself has poured 20 years of work into it. Every building, every fence, every improvement represents hours of his labour. This land holds his history, his identity, his sense of who he is. How do you just walk away from that? But how do you stay when staying means slowly starving, slowly going bankrupt, slowly watching your children suffer? Inside the house, Mary Henderson is awake, lying in bed listening to the wind, listening to her father-in-law's laboured breathing from the next room, listening to the house creak and groan as dust sifts through every crack. She's 39 years old and feels 60. She married Tom 15 years ago, when he was a prosperous young farmer with a future. She's given him 4 children. Ruth is 16, Billy is 12, Alma is 8, and baby James is 3. 4 children, all of them hungry, all of them facing an increasingly uncertain future. Mary rises and dresses. Like Tom, she wears clothes that were clean yesterday but are already dusty. She ties a scarf around her hair. Everyone wears head coverings now, trying to keep the dust out of their hair, though it doesn't really work. She goes to check on the children before starting breakfast. Ruth is awake in the room she shares with Alma. Ruth is 16 and should be in her junior year of high school, but school closed 3 months ago. There wasn't enough money to pay the teacher, and attendance had dropped so low. Families leaving, children kept home to work or because parents couldn't afford to buy them shoes, that keeping the school open didn't make sense. So Ruth's formal education ended at 10th grade. Not that it matters much, she thinks bitterly. What good is an education when there are no jobs, no future, no prospects beyond survival? Alma is still asleep, curled up under a quilt, her face covered by a cloth to help her breathe. She's 8 and small for her age, thin and pale. They're all thin now. The diet has deteriorated as money ran out and food prices stayed high, while farm prices collapsed. They eat a lot of beans, a lot of potatoes, a lot of cornmeal. Meat is rare. Fresh vegetables are rare. Milk is rationed despite having a cow. Everyone is losing weight, becoming gaunt and tired. In the boys' room, Billy is awake and James is sleeping. Billy is 12 and looks younger. He's been sick a lot this winter. The dust exacerbates every respiratory condition, and children are especially vulnerable. He has what they're calling dust pneumonia, a condition that's filling hospitals and killing children across the Great Plains. He survived, but he's weak and coughs constantly. James is 3 and surprisingly healthy despite everything. Mary checks on him, adjusting his cloth mask, making sure he's breathing okay. She goes to the kitchen to start breakfast. The kitchen is her domain, and she tries to keep it as clean as possible despite the dust. But it's a losing battle. Dust covers every surface within hours of cleaning. It gets into the food, the water, everything. You learn to ignore it, to accept a certain amount of grit in every meal, to stop trying to achieve the impossible standard of cleanliness you once maintained. She builds up the fire in the wood stove using precious wood they can barely afford. They burn through their wood pile faster than expected because the winter was cold, and they had to keep the house warm for the children. Now, wood has to be purchased, and they're cutting expenses wherever possible. She tries to use as little as necessary, but you need fire to cook, and everyone needs hot food. For breakfast, she's making cornmeal mush, fried potatoes, and biscuits. There's a little milk to drink and weak coffee for the adults. It's not much, but it's what they have. The cornmeal comes from grain they grew themselves, one of the few things that still grew reasonably well last year. The potatoes are from their garden, or what was left of it after the dust killed most of the vegetables. The flour for biscuits is purchased, expensive, but necessary because you need some variety in the diet or people start to lose morale completely. As she cooks, she thinks about money. It's what she thinks about constantly now, an obsessive mental calculation that never stops. They have $47 left in the bank, $47 between them, and complete destitution. The March payment to the bank was $85, which they couldn't pay. The bank has been understanding. They don't want to foreclose if they can avoid it, because foreclosed farms are worthless, but understanding has limits. If they can't make the April payment, which is also $85, the bank will have no choice. They owe money everywhere. They owe $130 to the feed store. They owe $85 to the general store for groceries and supplies bought on credit. They owe $45 to the doctor for treating Billy's dust pneumonia. They owe $12 for kerosene, $8 for school fees from before school closed, $15 for property taxes. The debts pile up, overwhelming, impossible to pay when they have no income. They haven't had a successful harvest in 3 years. The 1930 wheat crop was poor because of early drought. The 1931 crop failed almost completely. The 1932 crop was a total loss. They harvested almost nothing, and what they did harvest sold for prices so low that it didn't cover the cost of seed. This year they're not even planting. There's no point. Without crops, they have no income. Tom tried to find work, any work, but there is no work. Everyone is in the same situation. The local economy has collapsed. Businesses are closed. Construction has stopped. Even day labour is impossible to find. They're living on savings that are nearly exhausted and selling off assets to survive. They sold the car last year, a 1927 Ford that Tom was proud of. They got $35 for it, a fraction of what it was worth, because everyone is selling and nobody's buying. Now they have no transportation beyond a wagon, and the horses, which limits their options even further. They sold 4 horses, getting terrible prices. They sold 4 cows. They sold the pigs. They sold Mary's good furniture, the dining room set she inherited from her mother. They sold tools, equipment, anything that wasn't absolutely essential, and the money from all those sales is almost gone. Mary knows, they both know, though they haven't fully acknowledged it yet, that they're going to have to leave. The land is dying. The bank is going to foreclose. They can't feed their children properly. Ruth needs a future beyond this dying farm. Billy needs medical care they can't afford. They need to leave while they still have enough resources to make the journey, before they're completely destitute. But leaving means admitting defeat. It means abandoning Tom's family land, the land his grandfather fought for, the land they've poured their lives into. It means joining the growing army of refugees, Okies, they're called with contempt, who are fleeing west to California and Oregon. It means becoming homeless, rootless, dependent on charity and temporary work, joining the very bottom of the social ladder. Mary sets the table such as it is. They're down to mismatched dishes, having sold the good china. The food goes on the table in serving bowls, and she calls the family to breakfast. Tom comes in from the barn, his face grey with dust despite having been outside less than an hour. His father shuffles in from his room, coughing, looking frail and old. Ruth comes in quietly, her face showing the teenage misery of a girl watching her whole life collapse. Billy comes in slowly, still weak from being sick. Alma is cheerful, too young to fully understand how bad things are. James toddles in, holding Ruth's hand. They sit around the table, all 7 of them crowded into a kitchen that feels both too small and too empty at the same time. Tom says grace, a habit he's maintained despite increasing doubts about whether anyone is listening. Dear Lord, we thank you for this food and ask your blessing on this family. Help us to endure these trials and guide us in our decisions. Amen. They eat in relative silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks on plates and the constant background wind. The food is bland and there's not enough of it, but nobody complains. Complaining doesn't help. The cornmeal mush is gritty with dust despite Mary's best efforts. The biscuits are a little better, and she's saved a tiny bit of honey to spread on them, which makes them feel like a treat even though honey used to be common. Tom's father, John Henderson, starts coughing during breakfast. Deep, racking coughs that shake his whole body and leave him gasping. He's getting worse. The dust is killing him, slowly but certainly. He needs to be somewhere else. Somewhere with clean air, but where? And how would they get him there? And with what money? Storm's coming, John says when he catches his breath. Sky looks bad. Big one, maybe. Tom nods. He's seen it too. The sky has a particular quality when a major dust storm is building. A strange colour, a weight to the air, a sense of pressure that makes people and animals nervous. Today has that feeling. We should secure everything, Tom says. Make sure the barn is closed up tight, get the chickens inside, cover the well. I'll help, Ruth offers. At 16, she's become essential labour, doing work that would have been considered too hard for a girl in better times. But these aren't better times, and everyone works. After breakfast, Tom and Ruth go outside to prepare for the storm while Mary cleans up and tends to the younger children. The wind is picking up, and the sky to the southwest has a strange dark tinge. The horizon is disappearing into a haze that might be dust or might be something worse. They work together, father and daughter, securing anything that might blow away, closing shutters, checking that the barn doors can be secured. The chickens sense something wrong and are agitated, clucking and fluttering. Tom and Ruth herd them into the barn where they'll be safer than in the small coop that's already half buried by dust. "Dad," Ruth says as they work, "we can't stay here, can we?" Tom stops, looking at his daughter. She's grown up so much in the past few years, aged by hardship beyond her chronological years. She deserves an honest answer. "No," he says, "we probably can't." "Where will we go?" "California, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere west, where there's still rain, where things still grow." "When?" "Soon, maybe very soon." They continue working in silence, both thinking about what leaving means. For Tom, it's the death of a dream, the end of an identity. For Ruth, it's the end of the only life she's known. But also, and she's ashamed to think this, possibly the beginning of something better. She doesn't want to spend her life on a dying farm. She wants a future, wants possibilities, wants to be somewhere where being young doesn't mean being trapped. By mid-morning, the storm is clearly coming. The southwestern sky has turned an ominous dark brown, a rolling wall of dust moving toward them. Everyone who's been through this knows what's coming. A duster, a major dust storm that will turn day into night, make breathing difficult, bury everything in dirt. Tom calls everyone inside. They've developed a routine for storms. Windows are closed and sealed with rags stuffed into cracks. Doors are shut and towels placed at the bottom to block dust. Wet cloths are prepared to cover faces. The children are gathered in the most protected room, and then they wait. The storm hits around 11 in the morning. The wind suddenly increases, going from steady to violent in minutes. The dust arrives like a wall. One moment there's hazy visibility, the next moment everything disappears into brown darkness. The house shudders under the wind's force. Dust begins to infiltrate despite all their preparations, sifting through every tiny gap, filling the air inside the house with a fine, choking powder. They huddle together in the kitchen, cloths over their faces, trying to breathe through the dust. The younger children are frightened. James cries, and Mary holds him, trying to comfort him while also struggling to breathe herself. John Henderson coughs continuously, each cough sounding worse than the last. Tom sits with his back against the wall, listening to the wind scream and the house groan, wondering how much more they can endure. The storm is so dark that they need the kerosene lamp even though it's midday. In the dim, dusty light they look like ghosts, their faces covered, their eyes the only visible features. Nobody talks. Talking means breathing more. Breathing more means choking on dust. So they sit in silence, each alone with their thoughts, waiting for the storm to pass. Tom thinks about his grandfather, trying to imagine what the old man would do in this situation. But his grandfather lived in different times. There was no dust then, no drought, no depression. The land was new and fertile. Opportunities seemed limitless. The problems his grandfather faced were different. Dangerous, yes. Difficult, yes. But not like this. This is something new. something unprecedented, a disaster created by the intersection of natural drought and human folly. Mary thinks about her children, especially Billy with his weak lungs struggling to breathe through the dust. She thinks about what kind of mother lets her children suffer like this. What kind of mother stays in a place that's destroying her family's health? She knows the answer. A mother who has no choice, who has no money to leave, who is trapped by circumstance and poverty, and the simple fact that moving requires resources they don't have. Ruth thinks about California. She's heard stories. Everyone has. California is a paradise, they say. It never stops raining. Everything grows. There are jobs, opportunities, a future. She knows the stories are probably exaggerated, but they have to be better than Oklahoma, don't they? Anywhere has to be better than here, slowly suffocating in dust, slowly starving, slowly dying. The storm lasts about 3 hours, which is actually not that long as dust storms go. By early afternoon, the wind begins to decrease, and the darkness starts to lift. The brown gradually lightens to grey, then to a dusty yellow, then finally to something approaching normal daylight, though the air remains thick with suspended dust that will take days to fully settle. When it's safe to go outside, Tom ventures out first. The landscape has changed again. New drifts have formed, burying fences even deeper. The barn door is partially buried and takes effort to open. Everything, every surface, every object, is covered in a thick layer of fine brown dust. The chickens in the barn are alive but traumatized, huddled together, coated in dust. He walks around the property, assessing damage. A section of roof has blown off the small shed. More fence has been knocked down or buried. The garden, such as it was, is completely buried now. The dust is everywhere, inches deep in places, changing the very topography of the land. But the worst thing, the thing that makes Tom's heart sink, is that he knows this will happen again. Tomorrow, maybe. Next week, certainly. This is life now. Recurring dust storms, each one taking more topsoil, burying more fences, destroying more of what little remains. The land is dying, and they're dying with it. He walks back to the house and finds Mary and Ruth trying to clean up the dust that has infiltrated despite their best efforts. It's a Sisyphean task. They clean and within hours it will be dusty again. But they do it anyway because what else can they do? You maintain routines, you keep trying, even when trying seems pointless. Tom, Mary says when he comes in, we need to talk. He knows what this conversation will be. They've been avoiding it for months, but it can't be avoided anymore. The storm has made clear what they already knew. They cannot stay here. This place is killing them. If they stay, John Henderson will die of dust pneumonia. Billy might die. They'll slowly starve as their money runs out and their last assets lose all value. The bank will foreclose anyway, and then they'll be destitute with no chance of starting over. I know, Tom says, and we have to leave. Saying it out loud makes it real. They're going to abandon this land, this house, this life. They're going to pack up what they can carry and join the exodus west. They're going to become refugees in their own country, Okies searching for work and a future.
When? Mary asks.
Soon, within the week maybe, before the bank forecloses, while we still have a little money left, while we can still afford gas for the truck. We don't have a truck, Ruth points out. We'll buy one, with what's left of our savings. A used truck, something that can carry us and our belongings. It's not enough money to start over here, but it might be enough to get us to California. They discuss practical details. What to take. Clothes, bedding, cooking equipment, tools, anything that might be useful or sold. What to leave. Furniture, equipment, everything too big or heavy to carry. Where to go? California, probably. Following Route 66, joining the thousands of other refugees making that journey. What they'll do when they get there. Pick crops, find any work available. Try to start over with nothing. It's a grim conversation, full of hard choices and no good options. But there's also, underneath the grief and fear, a small spark of something that might be hope. At least they'll be doing something. At least they'll be trying to escape this nightmare instead of passively waiting for it to kill them. After lunch, more beans, more potatoes, the endless repetition of a diet limited by poverty. Tom walks to the nearest neighbour who still has a working telephone. It's 3 miles away, and he walks because they have no car and he needs to save the horses for essential work. The walk takes him through a landscape of abandonment. Empty houses, buried fences, dead fields stretching to the horizon. He passes the Morrison place, and on impulse walks up to the abandoned house. The door is hanging open. Inside, dust has drifted through the rooms, piling up against walls, covering everything. The Morrisons left everything they couldn't carry. Furniture, dishes, books, photographs. All of it is now slowly being buried. Tom picks up a photograph from a drift of dust. The Morrison family, taken maybe 5 years ago, everyone smiling, looking prosperous and confident. Where are they now? Did they make it to California? Are they better off? He puts the photograph down and leaves. Standing in an abandoned house feels too much like looking at his own near future. At the neighbour's house, the Stevenson place, one of the few families still hanging on, he uses their telephone to call the used car dealer in town. Yes, they have trucks for sale. Prices range from $75 to $150 depending on condition. Tom says he'll be in tomorrow to look at what they have. He has maybe $100 he can spend on a truck after keeping some money for gas and food for the journey. It won't buy much, but it will have to do. Walking back home, Tom thinks about what he's going to tell his father. John Henderson homesteaded this land 44 years ago. He spent his entire adult life here. Now at 68, sick and weak, he's being forced to leave. Tom knows it will break his father's heart. The old man won't want to leave, will argue they should stay, will talk about giving up too easily, but they don't have a choice. The land is gone. The farm is dead. Staying means dying. When he gets home, Tom finds his father sitting on the porch despite the dusty air, looking out at the ruined fields. Tom sits beside him, and for a long moment neither speaks. "We're leaving," Tom finally says. "In a few days, we're going to California." John doesn't respond immediately. He just stares out at the land he fought for, built up and is now losing. "This land was good once," John says. "Best wheat land in the world," they said, and it was true for a while. "I know, Dad. We did this. We killed it. Ploughed up the grass, planted wheat year after year, never let the land rest. We thought we were being modern, efficient. We thought we were improving things. We didn't know. We should have known. The Indians knew. They never ploughed the grass, lived here for thousands of years and never destroyed the land. It took us 40 years. They sit in silence, two men watching the death of a dream, the end of a way of life. Around them the wind continues its endless blowing, carrying away what little topsoil remains, slowly erasing everything they built. "Will you come with us?" Tom asks. "To California?" "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice." "Then I'll come. What else am I going to do? Stay here and die alone in the dust?" Tom puts his hand on his father's shoulder. They don't speak again, but they sit together as the afternoon wears on and the dust continues to fall and the wind continues to blow, and both men mourn for the land they're losing, and the life that's ending, and the future that feels uncertain and frightening and perhaps, if they're very lucky, might contain the possibility of something better than this. The decision has been made. They're leaving. Within the week, the Henderson family will pack what they can carry, abandon the land that 3 generations have worked, and join the exodus west toward California. But before they can leave, there's an enormous amount to accomplish. Practical preparations that will determine whether they survive the journey and have any chance of starting over in a place they've never seen. The afternoon of April 14th, 1933, finds Tom Henderson preparing to ride into Guyman, the nearest town 15 miles away. He needs to look at used trucks, buy supplies for the journey, attempt to sell what little they have left, and begin the complicated process of transforming their entire lives into something that can fit in a truck bed. The task feels overwhelming, but there's no alternative. Staying means dying, slowly, painfully, watching the children starve and the land continue to disintegrate around them. Before he leaves, Tom walks through the farm one final time as an owner, rather than as someone preparing to abandon it. He's making mental notes of what can be taken and what must be left behind, though, in truth, almost everything must be left behind. A truck can carry only so much, and there are 7 people who need space for living, not just for possessions. The house itself, 4 rooms of frame construction, painted white once but now grey with dust and years of sandblasting wind, will be abandoned. You can't take a house with you. His grandfather built a dugout here in 1889, right after the land run, living in that hole in the ground for 2 years while he proved up his claim and saved enough to build a small house. Tom's father expanded that house, adding 2 rooms and a proper kitchen. Tom himself improved it in the prosperity of the late 1920s, adding indoor water pump, better windows, a second bedroom for the growing children. All that work, all those improvements, will be left to slowly collapse and be buried by advancing dust drifts. The barn stands 40 yards from the house, a substantial structure that Tom's father built in 1895. It could hold 6 horses comfortably, along with hay storage, equipment, and workspace. Now it holds 2 horses, 1 cow, and a frightened flock of chickens. The horses, Daisy and Caesar, both over 10 years old, both reliable workers who've pulled ploughs and wagons for years, will have to be sold. You can't take horses to California in a truck, and even if you could, feeding them during the journey and after arrival would be impossible. The thought of selling them to an uncertain fate, possibly to someone who'll work them to death or sell them for meat, makes Tom physically ill. But there's no choice. Every asset must be converted to cash because cash is the only thing that might get them to California. The farm equipment scattered around the property represents decades of accumulated tools and machinery. A plough, a harrow, a cultivator, a grain drill, all the specialised implements for working soil that no longer exists. Who would buy them? Even if someone wanted them, they couldn't afford to pay anything meaningful. The market for agricultural equipment has collapsed completely. Tom will take hand tools, shovels, hammers, saws, wrenches, things that might be useful anywhere for any kind of work, but the big equipment will simply be abandoned, left to rust and be buried by dust alongside the buildings. He walks to the edge of what used to be his wheat field, standing where rich black topsoil used to turn over in heavy fertile chunks when you ploughed it. Now there's barely any topsoil left, just a thin, depleted layer over increasingly exposed subsoil that's the wrong colour, the wrong texture, incapable of supporting crops even if rain returned. The wind has taken the topsoil, millions of tons of it, blown it away to Kansas and Missouri and states even further east. Ships 600 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean have reported dust falling on their decks. Dust from Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas. Dust that used to be farmland. Dust that represents the destruction of an entire region's agricultural capacity. Tom knows, everyone knows now, though they didn't understand at the time, that they did this to themselves. The farmers destroyed their own land through a combination of ignorance, greed, and terrible timing. It started with World War I, when wheat prices soared because Europe needed food and American farmers could supply it. The government actively encouraged maximum production. Plant fence row to fence row, they said. Wheat will win the war. Food will win the war. So farmers ploughed up millions of acres of native prairie grass. Grass that had held the soil in place for 10,000 years. Grass whose deep root systems prevented erosion. Grass that could survive drought because it had evolved to survive on the Great Plains. They replaced that resilient native grass with wheat, and for a while it worked brilliantly. In the teens and early 20s, when rainfall was adequate, wheat grew tall and golden. Prices stayed high because European production took years to recover from the war. Farmers made money, real money, more than their fathers had made, more than they'd imagined possible. They bought more land, expanding their operations. They bought tractors, replacing horses with machinery that could plough faster and deeper. They took out loans to finance expansion, confident that wheat prices would stay high and rain would keep falling. Then both stopped. Wheat prices collapsed in the late 1920s as European agriculture recovered and global supply exceeded demand. Farmers who had taken on debt to expand suddenly couldn't cover their loans. Then came 1929 and the stock market crash, which destroyed the broader economy and eliminated what remained of the market for wheat. And then, in 1930, the rain stopped. Not completely, there's been some rain over the past 3 years, enough to torment farmers with hope, enough to make them plant crops that then withered and died, but nowhere near enough to sustain agriculture. And with the native prairie grass gone, ploughed under and destroyed, there was nothing to hold the soil when the drought came and the wind started blowing. The first dust storms came in early 1931. At first they seemed like isolated events, almost curiosities. Children played in the drifting dust, building dust castles the way coastal children build sand castles. But the storms grew worse and more frequent. By 1932, dust storms were common occurrences, and in 1933 they're nearly constant. Some days are worse than others. Today has already seen one major storm and will probably see another before nightfall, but the dust never fully settles, never fully clears. There's always a haze in the air, always dust suspended in the atmosphere, always the taste of grit in your mouth and the scratch of it in your throat. The topsoil that took 10,000 years to build, that farmers destroyed in less than 3 decades of careless ploughing, is now simply blowing away. It's gone. Future generations might rebuild it through careful conservation practices, but that will take centuries. For now, for the people living through this disaster, the land is dead and they must leave or die with it. Tom saddles Daisy for the ride to Gaimon. She's a good mare, steady and reliable, and he talks to her gently as he tightens the girth, feeling guilty that she'll soon be sold to strangers. Horses aren't pets. Farm horses are working animals, tools essentially. But Tom has worked alongside Daisy for 8 years, and he's fond of her in the unsentimental way farmers are fond of good livestock. She deserves better than being sold in a collapsed market to whoever will take her. The ride to Gaimon takes about 2 hours through a landscape that looks increasingly like photographs Tom has seen of the moon or Mars. Alien, lifeless, hostile to human existence. The road is dirt, deeply rutted where the last vehicles passed through, partially buried by drifting dust in other places. Navigation requires attention, because the landscape shifts constantly as dust drifts form and reform, making familiar landmarks disappear and new obstacles appear. He passes farm after abandoned farm. Some have been empty for months, the Morrison place, the Turner place, the Johnson place, and are already being reclaimed by dust. Windows are broken, doors hang open, or are completely gone. Porches have collapsed, roofs are starting to cave in. These houses will soon be completely buried, becoming low mounds in the landscape like ancient ruins, all evidence of human habitation erased by the relentless wind and dust. Other farms were abandoned more recently. The Peterson place still has intact windows, still looks like someone might return even though they won't. Tom sees a doll sitting on the porch, abandoned when the family left, now covered in dust but still recognisable as a child's toy. The sight makes his throat tight. Some child loved that doll, played with it, talked to it the way children do, and then had to leave it behind because there wasn't room in the truck for toys. He passes one family on the road heading west, their entire lives loaded into a battered truck. The truck, Tom thinks it's a Ford, maybe 1924 or 1925, is absurdly overloaded. The bed is piled high with furniture, mattresses, boxes, suitcases, bags, everything they own, all covered with a tarp and tied down with rope that looks worryingly frayed. 3 or 4 children sit on top of the load, their faces smudged with dust, their expressions blank with exhaustion or shock or both. An older person, grandmother maybe, sits in the passenger seat, visible through the window, staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who has seen too much. The father driving looks perhaps 40, but might be younger, aged by hardship, his face set in grim determination or despair. It's hard to tell which. Tom and the other man make brief eye contact as they pass, but don't wave or acknowledge each other. There's a shame to this exodus that prevents the normal courtesies. Leaving feels like admitting failure, admitting you couldn't make it, admitting the land defeated you. Even though everyone knows that staying is impossible, even though leaving is the rational choice, there's still shame in it. So the refugees don't greet each other, don't acknowledge their shared fate. They just pass like ghosts, each heading toward uncertain futures. As Tom gets closer to Gaimon, he starts seeing more traffic, all of it heading west. More families fleeing, joining the Great Migration. He tries to count vehicles but loses track. In 2 miles he sees at least 15 trucks and cars, all loaded down, all heading west. 15 families, maybe 80 or 100 people, all refugees, and this is just one small stretch of road. Multiply that across all the roads leading west from the Dust Bowl region, and you're talking about thousands of people per day abandoning the Great Plains. Gaimon appears through the dust like a ghost town, which in some ways it's becoming. The town used to have perhaps 1,500 residents. Tom estimates it's down to maybe 1,000 now, possibly fewer. Main Street, which used to bustle with activity on weekday afternoons, farmers coming to town for supplies, women shopping, children playing, merchants doing business, is now half deserted. There are a few trucks parked in front of still operating businesses, a handful of people visible on the sidewalks, but the general impression is of abandonment and decay. The buildings tell the story. Tom counts as he rides down Main Street. 5 empty storefronts just in the first block. Harris's Hardware closed 6 months ago. There's a faded, going out of business sign still in the window. Morrison's Clothing, no relation to Frank Morrison who runs the used car lot, closed around the same time. The shoe repair shop is empty, the barber shop is empty, the pharmacy is boarded up. The hotel, a 3-story building that used to accommodate travelling salesmen and visiting family members, looks abandoned. Windows dark, no sign of activity. Front door possibly nailed shut, though Tom can't tell from the street. The businesses that remain open have a desperate temporary quality, as if everyone knows they're just waiting out the inevitable. The general store is open, but has clearly reduced its inventory. The windows that used to display goods are mostly empty. The bank is open, but has a haunted, nervous energy. Employees visible through the windows looking worried, which makes sense because half their loans are in default, and foreclosures are accelerating. The grain elevator is still operating, though there's almost no grain to store or ship. The post office, a federal building, remains open because it's government-run, but Tom sees only 2 or 3 people going in or out in the time he's watching. There's a restaurant, Maggie's Cafe, which used to serve good home cooking, that's technically open but has only 2 visible customers inside despite it being early afternoon, when lunch business should be strong. Tom remembers when you couldn't get a table at Maggie's on a weekday afternoon without waiting. Now the place looks like it's barely surviving. He ties Daisy to a hitching post outside Morrison's used cars. A lot with perhaps 20 vehicles in various states of disrepair. Some are clearly abandoned vehicles that people couldn't sell and simply left. Others are vehicles that Morrison has taken on consignment or bought cheap, hoping to resell them to fleeing families who need transportation. Before the Depression and the drought, this would have been a thriving business. Oklahoma farmers bought trucks and cars in large numbers during the prosperous 20s. Now the lot looks like a vehicle graveyard. Every vehicle covered in dust, some with flat tyres, all of them worth far less than they would have been 5 years ago. Frank Morrison comes out to meet Tom, recognising him immediately. Frank is perhaps 55, wearing overalls and a shirt that were probably clean this morning but are already grey with dust. His face has the deeply lined, prematurely aged look that everyone in the Dust Bowl is developing, a combination of sun damage, dust exposure, stress, and inadequate nutrition. "Tom Henderson," Frank says, extending a hand for shaking. "Heard you were looking for a truck. Word travels fast in this town, especially now that there are fewer people to spread it around." "That's right. Need something reliable enough to get to California. Don't have much money." Frank's expression becomes understanding and sympathetic. He's had this conversation dozens of times in recent months. Everyone's in the same situation. Sellers desperate to sell anything. Buyers having almost no money. Prices collapsing but still too high for people who are nearly destitute. The normal dynamics of negotiation don't apply anymore. It's more like 2 desperate people trying to figure out how to help each other survive. "What can you spend?" Frank asks. It's a blunt question, but there's no point in dancing around it. If Tom has only $50, there's no point showing him vehicles that cost $100. $100, maybe a little less depending on what's left over after buying supplies. Frank visibly winces. $100 won't buy much of a truck, especially not one reliable enough for a 2,000-mile journey across mountain passes and desert. But he nods and leads Tom into the lot, beginning to show options. "The thing you need to understand," Frank says as they walk, "is that none of these vehicles are ideal. They're all vehicles that people couldn't sell for decent money, trucks that have been sitting here for months because nobody can afford to buy cars anymore. I'm trying to be honest with you. I know your family, I'm not trying to cheat you, but these are what's available at your price point, and they all have problems." They stop at a 1926 Ford truck painted dark blue, though the paint is so faded and dust-covered that the original colour is barely visible. Frank opens the hood to show Tom the engine. This one's $85, 4-cylinder engine, Model T based, very simple and reliable mechanically. The engine's sound. I've had my mechanic check it over. Started right up last week when I tested it. But look at the tyres. Tom looks. 3 of the 4 tyres are badly worn, showing canvas in places. The 4th tyre is somewhat better, but still not good. Those won't make it to California. Probably not. You'd need to replace them along the way, or at least the worst ones. Tyres are expensive, though. $5 or $6 each for used ones, more for new. The windshield's cracked. Frank points to a spiderweb crack on the passenger side. But that won't affect driving, just visibility and rain. And from what I hear, there's not much rain between here and California. The truck bed is solid, which is important. You don't want the floor rusting through when you've got your possessions loaded. It'll seat 3 in the cab, maybe 4 if they're small. They move to the next option, a 1925 Chevrolet truck, faded black, even dustier than the Ford. This one's $75, runs, but the engine smokes. You can see the oil residue around the exhaust. That means it's burning oil, which means there's wear in the cylinders or the rings are bad. It'll get you places, but you'll need to add oil frequently, maybe every 100 miles. No spare tyre, and the tyres it has are worse than the Ford's. The brakes are soft, they work, but you have to push harder than you should. Tom examines the Chevrolet skeptically. Burning oil is a bad sign. An engine that burns oil will eventually fail, and failure in the middle of nowhere could be catastrophic. The third option is a 1927 Dodge truck, painted green originally but now mostly just grey-brown with dust. $95. This one looks better than the others, and it is in some ways. The body's in good shape. The tyres are acceptable, though not great. The windshield is intact. But it has transmission problems. Second gear grinds badly. You can get it into gear if you're careful, but it takes skill and it's getting worse. Eventually second gear is going to fail completely, and then you'll be trying to make it across the mountains in either first gear, which is too slow, or third gear, which doesn't have enough torque for hills. Tom walks around all 3 vehicles thinking hard. These are terrible options. Vehicles that might break down before reaching California, leaving his family stranded in the middle of nowhere with no resources and no way forward. But these are the options available when you have almost no money and can't afford to be selective. The Ford is probably your best bet, Frank says after giving Tom time to think. The engine's sound, which is the most important thing. You can nurse a vehicle with bad tyres, drive slow, avoid sharp rocks, replace them when you can afford to. But if the engine fails, you're stuck. The Ford's engine should make it if you take care of it. Check the oil daily, don't overheat it. Don't push it too hard up hills. What if it breaks down anyway? What if I'm in the middle of New Mexico or Arizona with 7 people in a truck that won't run? Frank doesn't have a good answer because there isn't one. Then you're in trouble. You try to find someone to help you. You try to find a mechanic in the nearest town. You fix it yourself if you can. Or he trails off, not wanting to complete the thought. Or we're stranded and destitute, Tom finishes. Yeah, that's the risk. But Tom, staying here is also a risk. Maybe a bigger risk. At least if you're heading to California, you're trying. You're moving towards something. Staying here means watching your family slowly starve while the dust gets worse and the bank forecloses. Every family that's leaving is taking the same gamble, buying questionable vehicles with inadequate money and hoping they make it. Tom knows Frank is right. He examines the Ford truck more carefully, checking everything he knows how to check from years of maintaining farm equipment. The engine, when Frank starts it, sounds reasonably healthy. No loud knocks, no terrible rattles. Oil pressure seems adequate. The transmission shifts smoothly through all gears. The steering has some play but isn't terrible. The brakes work, though they're not as responsive as they should be. The body's dented and the paint is shot, but that's cosmetic. The truck bed is solid, about 7 feet long and 5 feet wide, which should barely be enough for their possessions and some of the family to ride in. I'll take it, Tom says. $85. They shake hands and go into Frank's small office. A wooden building that used to be nicer but is now dusty and decrepit like everything else. Frank has the title and paperwork ready. The transaction is simple, because legal formalities have become much looser as the system collapses. Tom counts out $85 in small bills and change, most of what remains of the family's savings. Frank writes a bill of sale, signs the title transfer and hands Tom the keys. I'll throw in a spare fan belt and some extra oil, Frank says. That doesn't cost me much and it might save your life if something breaks. Also, here's advice. Don't drive at night if you can help it. These old trucks don't have great headlights, and the roads can be treacherous. Find a place to camp before dark, even if it means stopping earlier than you planned, and watch the temperature gauge. If the engine starts overheating, especially going up mountains, stop and let it cool down. Better to arrive late than to crack the engine block trying to push through. Tom thanks him sincerely. Frank is being genuinely helpful, trying to give a desperate family the best chance of survival that he can. In better times, this would be a business transaction and nothing more. But these aren't better times, and human decency means something when everyone is struggling. Tom decides to leave the truck at Frank's lot for now and pick it up tomorrow. He needs to walk around town, buy supplies, try to sell a few items, and riding the horse home will be easier than trying to drive an unfamiliar truck. Frank agrees to keep the truck secure overnight. Tom's next stop is the general store, run by a man named Calvin Jenkins, who's been in business for 30 years. The store is a large single-story building with wooden floors that used to be clean but are now perpetually dusty. The inventory is noticeably reduced from what Tom remembers. Entire shelves are empty or sparsely stocked, and many products simply aren't available anymore. Jenkins is behind the counter doing paperwork and looks up when Tom enters. He's perhaps 60, thin to the point of gauntness, and looks profoundly tired. Tom Henderson, heard you're leaving. Word travels fast. It's a small town getting smaller every day. Where are you headed? California. San Joaquin Valley, probably. Mary's sister lives near Bakersfield, so we have some connection there at least. Jenkins nods, his expression sympathetic but also resigned. You're the third family this week to come in buying supplies for California. Lost half my customers in the past year, and most of the ones who remain can't pay. I'm probably going to have to close myself before too long. Can't stay in business when nobody has money and inventory costs keep rising. I'm sorry, Tom says, and he means it. Jenkins has been fair to local farmers, extending credit when times were tight, never gouging on prices. He doesn't deserve to be ruined by circumstances beyond his control. Not your fault. Not anybody's fault, really, or everybody's fault depending on how you look at it. What do you need? Tom has a list that Mary helped him prepare. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, beans, rice, canned milk, canned fruit if it's not too expensive, matches, soap, and anything else that's non-perishable and might be useful on a long journey. Jenkins moves around the store gathering items while Tom follows, and they discuss quantities and prices. Flour's expensive right now, Jenkins says, hefting a 25-pound sack. $6 for this size. I know that's high, but my supplier in Oklahoma City raised prices and I can't absorb the cost. You'll need at least 2 sacks for a family your size, probably 3 to have a cushion. Tom calculates quickly. 3 sacks of flour is $18, and they still need everything else. This is going to eat up most of what remains after buying the truck. Beans are more reasonable, Jenkins continues. £10 sack is $2. They're nutritious, filling, store well, and you can cook them over a campfire. I'd recommend taking £30 at least. They work through the list methodically. Sugar, $3 for £10. Salt, cheap at 50 cents for a large container because nobody's buying it. You need salt for preserving food, but nobody's preserving food because they can't afford food to preserve. Coffee, expensive at $4 for £3, but Tom knows Mary considers coffee essential for morale and he agrees. Canned condensed milk, $1 per can, and they take 6 cans for the baby and for cooking. Canned fruit, too expensive at 50 cents per can, they'll do without. Matches, $1 for a large box. Soap, homemade lye. Soap is $1 for a large bar. Store-bought soap is more expensive. They take the homemade. As Jenkins assembles the order, Tom watches the total climb. $18 in flour, $6 in beans, $3 in sugar, $4 in coffee, $6 in milk, $1 for salt and matches and soap combined. $38 total, and they still don't have kerosene for lamps, cooking oil, any kind of medicine for emergencies, or 100 other things that would be useful. I can't pay all of this now, Tom admits. I've got maybe $12 left after buying the truck. Can you extend me credit? Jenkins looks pained. He already has hundreds of dollars in unpaid credit accounts from farmers who couldn't pay and then left without settling their debts. Every dollar he extends now is likely a dollar he'll never see. But Tom Henderson has been a reliable customer for 20 years, and Jenkins is not a cruel man. "I'll put it on your account," Jenkins says. $38. If you can pay some now, that helps, but I understand your situation. Tom pays $12, leaving him with almost nothing, and Jenkins records the debt in his ledger, knowing it will probably never be repaid. They load the supplies into burlap sacks that Tom can carry on the horse. It'll be awkward, but manageable. "Good luck in California," Jenkins says as Tom prepares to leave. "I hope you find what you're looking for out there." "I hope you can keep the store open." We'll see. Not much point in a store when there are no customers and no stock to sell. Might have to head west myself before too long. Tom's next stop is the grain elevator, a tall wooden structure that dominates Guyman's skyline. The elevator is where farmers bring their harvest to be weighed, graded, stored, and eventually shipped to markets. In good years, the elevator would be busy during harvest season, trucks lined up waiting to unload, the scales operating constantly, the storage bins filling with golden grain. Now it sits mostly empty and idle. The manager, a man named Pete Sullivan, is in the small office, filling out paperwork even though there's barely any grain to account for. He looks up when Tom enters, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Tom, you bringing in grain or looking for work?" It's said without irony. The elevator has laid off most of its seasonal workers and Sullivan knows Tom is desperate. "Bringing grain. Not much. Maybe 500 pounds of wheat I've been holding from last year's harvest, hoping prices would improve." Sullivan's expression becomes sympathetic. Prices haven't improved. They've gotten worse. Wheat's at 15 cents a bushel right now, and that's probably generous. "I've got no buyers. Nobody wants wheat when there's a glut nationally, and half the farmers in America are defaulting on loans." 15 cents a bushel is insultingly low. Tom remembers when wheat sold for over $2 a bushel in the early 20s. Even in the late 20s, before the crash, you could get $1 or more. 15 cents barely covers the cost of seed, never mind labour or equipment or anything else. But Tom has no choice. "I'll take 15 cents. They walk to Tom's farm wagon, which he'd loaded earlier and brought to town yesterday, planning this sale. The wheat's in sacks, maybe 500 pounds total. Sullivan weighs it carefully, calculating. 500 pounds is about 8 bushels at 60 pounds per bushel. 8 bushels at 15 cents each equals $1.20. Tom stares at the number. A year ago he would have gotten $16 or more for this wheat. Now it's worth little more than $1. This wheat represents hours of work, planting, tending, harvesting, threshing, and it's nearly worthless. "I know it's not much," Sullivan says. "If it helps, wheat prices are bad everywhere. It's not just here. It's national, global even. There's too much supply and too little demand." Tom takes the $1.20 without comment. He adds it to his rapidly dwindling funds and thanks Sullivan. At least it's something, enough to buy a little gas maybe. Walking through Guyman, Tom sees the full scope of the devastation that the Dust Bowl and Depression have inflicted on rural Oklahoma. The bank has a foreclosure notice board mounted outside, a large cork board that's completely covered with listings, overlapping in places. Tom stops to read a few. 160 acres, Section 23, Township 4, foreclosed for non-payment. 320 acres, Section 15, Township 6, foreclosed for non-payment. On and on, dozens of farms being foreclosed, hundreds of acres of land that nobody wants to buy because the land is worthless now, farmers being dispossessed without anyone benefiting from it. The courthouse steps, where auctions are held for foreclosed property, have a notice about an auction next week. Tom wonders if anyone will show up. Who would bid on foreclosed farmland in the Dust Bowl? You'd have to be crazy or ignorant to buy land here now. Even if you got it for pennies on the dollar, what would you do with it? You can't farm it. There's no topsoil. You can't develop it. There's no economy to support development. It's just dead land, and it'll stay dead until somehow, decades from now, the ecology recovers. He sees other families preparing to leave, their entire lives being loaded into vehicles. There's a truck parked outside the hardware store, what's left of the hardware store. It closed, but the building is still there, with a hand-painted sign on the side, California or Bust. The defiant humour feels forced, a brave face put on desperation. The family loading the truck, Tom doesn't recognise them. Maybe they're from one of the outlying farms. moves with the exhausted mechanical motions of people who have been defeated but are still functioning. They're not talking to each other, just working, loading boxes and bags and furniture, trying to fit their entire lives into limited space. Tom walks past the church, Methodist, where his family attends when they can, though attendance has dropped dramatically as families leave or simply give up. The minister, Reverend Thompson, is outside sweeping dust off the front steps, a Sisyphean task since more dust will accumulate within hours. He waves to Tom. "Heard you're leaving," Reverend Thompson says. He's perhaps 45, still has energy and faith despite the circumstances, and has been trying to keep his congregation together as it disintegrates. "That's right, heading to California in a few days." "I'll be sorry to see you go. Your family has been part of this community for a long time." "Not much community left to be part of. How many families are still attending services?" Reverend Thompson sighs. "Maybe 20 families, down from 60 just 2 years ago. And every week I hear about someone else leaving. I don't know how much longer we can keep the church open. Eventually there won't be enough people to support a minister." "What will you do?" "Follow my congregation, I suppose. If they're going to California, maybe that's where I need to be too. There's a town near Bakersfield that's growing because of all the refugees arriving. They'll need churches, schools, community institutions. Maybe that's where I'm called to serve now." They talk for a few more minutes about practical things. Whether the church has any supplies that Tom's family could use for the journey. They don't. The church is nearly as destitute as everyone else. What the roads are like heading west. Reverend Thompson has heard mixed reports. Passable but rough, with camp spots and water sources if you know where to look. Then Tom continues on his way, and Reverend Thompson returns to his futile sweeping. At the post office, a small federal building that's cleaner and better maintained than most structures because government money is keeping it operating, Tom has an important task. He's brought a letter he wrote last night to Mary's sister in Bakersfield, California. Mary's sister, her name is Dorothy, married name Hastings, moved to California in 1927 when her husband got work there. They've corresponded regularly, and Dorothy's letters have been increasingly encouraging about California. Work available, mild climate, better opportunities. Tom's letter explains that the Henderson family is coming, asks if they can stay temporarily while looking for work and getting established. Tries not to sound too desperate, even though they are extremely desperate. The postage is 3 cents, which he can barely afford, but this letter might be the difference between having some help when they arrive and being completely on their own in a strange place. He mails it, knowing it might take 10 days or more to arrive, knowing they might reach California before the letter does, but hoping Dorothy receives it and is willing to help. Walking back to where he left Daisy, Tom sees a truck broken down by the side of the road, with a family standing around it looking desperate. The truck's hood is up, and a man, maybe mid-30s, wearing overalls and a hat, is staring at the engine as if he could fix it through force of will. A woman sits in the passenger seat holding an infant, her face blank with exhaustion. 3 small children sit on the loaded truck bed, waiting. Tom stops. "Need help?" The man looks up, his expression a mixture of hope and embarrassment. "Engine quit. Not sure what's wrong. I'm not much of a mechanic. We were heading to California and now..." He trails off, the implications obvious. Tom is not an expert mechanic either, but he's kept farm equipment running for 20 years through improvisation and determination. He looks at the engine, checking basics: spark plugs, fuel line, distributor. After a few minutes, he finds the problem. A loose connection in the distributor that's preventing spark. He tightens it, tests it, and the engine starts when the man tries again. "Thank you," the man says, profoundly relieved. "We've got almost no money and I didn't know what we'd do if we were stuck here." "Good luck," Tom says. "Check your connections every morning before you start driving. Vibration can loosen things." The family drives off, heading west, and Tom mounts Daisy for the ride home. He spent most of the day in town and accomplished what he needed to. Bought the truck, bought supplies, sold his wheat for almost nothing, mailed his letter. Now he needs to get home before dark, before another dust storm potentially hits, and begin the actual work of preparing to leave. The ride home takes him back through the same desolate landscape, past the same abandoned farms, through the same omnipresent dust. The wind has picked up slightly and the sky to the southwest has that ominous colour again. Not quite as dark as this morning's storm, but still threatening. He needs to get home. He arrives at the farm as the sun is setting, or where the sun would be if you could see it clearly through the dust-hazed atmosphere. The actual sunset isn't visible, just a gradual dimming of the dusty light until it becomes dusty darkness. Tom puts Daisy in the barn, feeds and waters the horses, checks on the cow and chickens, then goes inside to face the chaos of a family preparing to abandon their home. The house looks like a hurricane has gone through it. Every room is in disarray with possessions sorted into piles. Take, sell, abandon. The take pile is small and carefully chosen, only essentials that can't be replaced. The sell pile is optimistically large, full of items that Mary hopes she can sell for a few dollars, even though the market for used goods has completely collapsed. The abandon pile is huge and heartbreaking, containing the accumulated possessions of 15 years of marriage and before. Photographs in frames, books, dishes, decorative items, tools they can't fit, furniture they can't carry, everything that made this house a home. Mary is in the kitchen with Ruth, both of them looking exhausted. They've spent the day going through every room, making impossible decisions about what to keep and what to leave. Ruth's eyes are red. Tom suspects she's been crying, probably while handling some of her possessions that must be abandoned. "Did you get the truck?" Mary asks. "Ford 26, $85. I'll bring it home tomorrow morning. It should make it to California if we're careful." "Should?" "That's the best I can promise. It's old and used and might break down, but it's what we could afford." Mary nods, accepting this because there's no alternative. "I've been working on clothes. Everyone gets 3 outfits, 1 to wear, 2 packed, plus coats because California nights can be cold, and we'll need warm clothes if we have to camp in the mountains. Everything else we try to sell." 3 outfits sounds like deprivation, but it's realistic given space constraints. Mary estimates that clothes for 7 people, even at just 3 outfits each, will take up significant space in the truck. Winter coats are bulky but necessary. Shoes are essential. Everyone needs sturdy shoes, plus a backup pair because shoes wear out and can't easily be replaced on the road. That's 14 pairs of shoes right there, another significant load. Ruth has been sorting books. She loves reading, has accumulated maybe 30 books over the years. School books, novels, poetry, a few reference books. She's choosing 3 to take. The family Bible, essential both religiously and practically. It contains family birth records. A dictionary, practical for education. And a collection of Shakespeare, because she needs something beautiful. Something that reminds her that human culture is more than just survival. Everything else is being packed into a box to be sold, though Tom suspects they won't find buyers. Books are heavy luxury items that nobody can afford right now. Billy and Alma have been helping pack in the enthusiastic but not particularly useful way that children help. They don't really understand what's happening. They know they're going on a trip to California, but they don't grasp the permanence of it, don't understand they're leaving forever. Billy's excited because he's never been anywhere except Guyman and he thinks California will be an adventure. Alma is worried about leaving her friend Sarah from 3 farms over, not understanding that Sarah's family has already left. James, at 3, understands nothing except that the house is in chaos and routine is disrupted, which makes him cranky. Mary has been managing him while also trying to pack, a nearly impossible dual task. John Henderson sits in his chair in the corner, watching the family prepare to abandon his land. He's said little all day, just watching. Tom knows his father is grieving. This house holds his wife's memory. She died here 10 years ago after a long illness. This land holds 44 years of his life, of work and pride and accomplishment. And in a few days he'll walk out that door and never return, leaving it all to be buried by dust. Tom sits beside his father. "How you doing, Dad?" "I'm managing, don't have much choice, do I?" "We could stay if you really want to. And watch you and Mary and the children slowly starve? Watch the bank take the land anyway? No, you're right to leave. He trails off, unable to articulate the grief and loss. They sit together in silence, 2 men mourning the end of a dream, the death of a way of life. Around them, the family continues preparing for an exodus that feels both necessary and catastrophic, a choice between 2 kinds of suffering with no good option. The evening meal is somber. Mary has cooked beans and cornbread. Simple, filling food that uses ingredients they still have. Nobody complains about the monotony of the diet. They eat quietly, each person lost in their own thoughts about what the next few days will bring. After dinner, Tom goes outside despite the dusty air. He walks to the edge of his former wheat field and stands looking at the land he's about to abandon. 3 generations, 44 years, all ending because they destroyed their own land through ignorance. He thinks about his grandfather running in the land run, claiming this quarter section, building a life here. He thinks about his father expanding the farm, raising a family, making it prosper. He thinks about his own years here, the good times in the 20s when wheat prices were high and the future seemed unlimited. And now it's over. The topsoil is gone, blown away to states 1,000 miles east. The rain has stopped and might not return for years, might never return on a scale adequate for farming. The economy has collapsed. The bank is foreclosing. There's nothing left but to leave. Footsteps behind him announce Ruth's arrival. She stands beside him, and they look together at the dying land. "Are you scared?" she asks. "Terrified," Tom admits. "We're about to drive into the unknown with $30, a questionable truck, 7 people, and no real plan except to get to California and hope we find work. But staying would be worse?" "Yes, staying would be worse. At least this way we have a chance." They stand together until darkness falls completely, until the dusty stars are the only light, until the wind's endless blowing is the only sound. Tomorrow Tom will bring the truck home. The day after they'll finish packing. And the day after that, or maybe the day after that, they'll load everything they own and everyone they love into that truck and drive away, joining the great exodus west, becoming refugees in their own country, searching for survival, and maybe, if they're very lucky, the possibility of something better than this slow death by dust and despair. The night of April 14th, 1933 settles over the Henderson farm with the weight of finality. This is one of their last nights in the house that 3 generations have called home, one of their last nights on land that Tom's grandfather claimed in the land run of 1889, one of their last nights as Oklahomans before they become refugees. Okies, migrants fleeing environmental and economic catastrophe. The house is in chaos from the day's packing efforts. Every room looks ransacked, with possessions sorted into piles, boxes half filled, furniture pushed aside to make space for the sorting process. The children are finally asleep despite the disruption, Billy and James in their room, Ruth and Alma in theirs. But the adults are still awake, still working, still trying to make impossible decisions about what to take and what to abandon. Mary sits at the kitchen table with a piece of paper, making lists by the light of a kerosene lamp. She's trying to calculate everything they'll need for the journey, and for starting over in California, bedding for 7 people, cooking equipment, enough clothes to last until they can afford to buy more, personal items like hairbrushes and combs and sewing supplies, all the mundane necessities of daily life that you don't think about until you're trying to pack your entire existence into a truck bed. The space is cruelly limited. The Ford truck Tom bought has a bed that's about 7 feet long and 5 feet wide, 35 square feet. Into that space they need to fit everything for 7 people. Clothes, bedding, cooking equipment, tools, food, water containers, spare parts for the truck, and hopefully some furniture like beds, because sleeping on the ground for weeks would be miserable, especially for John Henderson, with his bad lungs, and Tom himself, who's not young anymore. Mary's doing the math obsessively. 7 people, 3 outfits each, that's 21 outfits. Assume each outfit takes up about a cubic foot when folded. That's 21 cubic feet just for clothes. Add winter coats, bulky items, maybe another 7 cubic feet. 14 pairs of shoes, call it another 7 cubic feet. So 35 cubic feet for clothing and shoes alone, which means they've used up all their vertical space if the load is 1 foot deep, or a third of their space if they stack things 3 feet high. Bedding. 7 people need blankets and some kind of sleeping surface. They can't fit 7 actual beds, but maybe they can fit 3 or 4 thin mattresses that can be rolled up plus blankets. That's another significant volume. Cooking equipment. They need pots, pans, a skillet, plates, cups, utensils for 7 people. Food supplies. The flour, beans and other items Tom bought today will take up substantial space. Water. They'll need containers to carry water because desert crossings might go long distances between water sources. The more Mary calculates, the more impossible it seems. They simply can't fit everything they need. Choices will have to be made. Brutal choices about what's essential and what's merely important, what can be replaced and what can't, what's worth the space it occupies, and what isn't. Tom is in the barn doing his own calculating. They're leaving in 2 days, April 16th, assuming nothing goes wrong. Tomorrow he'll bring the truck home from Guyman and they'll spend all day loading it, testing the arrangement, probably unloading and reloading multiple times as they realise things don't fit the way they thought. The 16th they'll leave at dawn, hoping to make good distance before the day's heat builds. He's trying to figure out the route. They'll take local roads north to Liberal, Kansas, then pick up Route 66, which runs from Chicago to Los Angeles. Route 66 is the main artery for the Dust Bowl exodus. Thousands of families are using it to flee west. The route goes through the Texas Panhandle, across New Mexico, through Arizona, and finally into California. Total distance is roughly 2,000 miles, maybe a bit more depending on exact routing. At 20 to 30 miles per hour average speed, accounting for rough roads, mountains, the truck's limitations and necessary stops, they might cover 200 miles on a good day, 150 on a bad day. That's somewhere between 10 and 20 days of driving if everything goes perfectly. But things won't go perfectly. The truck will need maintenance, probably repairs. They'll need to stop for water and food. They'll need to find places to camp at night. They might need to stop for work to earn money for gas and food since $30 won't be enough. Realistically, Tom thinks 3 weeks minimum. Maybe a month, maybe longer if they have serious problems or need to work along the way. 3 to 4 weeks of sleeping in or beside the truck, of cooking over campfires, of dusty roads and summer heat, and uncertainty about what waits at the end. He's also thinking about the horses, Daisy and Caesar. Tomorrow, when he goes to get the truck, he'll need to sell them. He's been putting off thinking about this too much because it's painful. These are good animals who've worked faithfully for years, and he's selling them into an uncertain fate because he has no choice. The market for horses has collapsed along with everything else. He'll be lucky to get $20 for both of them combined. They're worth 10 times that in any reasonable market, but there are no reasonable markets anymore. The milk cow presents a similar problem. They can't take her. You can't transport a milk cow in a truck to California. She needs to be sold too, though. Who'll buy her when everyone is either leaving or desperately short of money? Maybe someone staying will take her for almost nothing just to have fresh milk. That's all Tom can hope for. Inside the house, Ruth can't sleep despite being exhausted. She's lying in bed thinking about leaving, about the future, about California and what it might be like. She's 16, and her education has ended at 10th grade, but she's smart and she reads voraciously and she understands more about their situation than her parents might give her credit for. She knows they're not heading toward security. They're heading toward uncertainty, toward probable poverty, toward work as migrant farm labourers, which is brutal work for terrible pay. The letters from Mary's sister Dorothy have been encouraging but also realistic. Yes, there's work in California, but it's seasonal and poorly paid and thousands of people are competing for it. The migrants are not welcomed. They're seen as dirty, ignorant, taking jobs from real Californians. There's prejudice and exploitation and living conditions that are often as bad as what they're leaving. But Ruth also knows that staying would mean no future at all. Here she would probably marry young, maybe 17 or 18, to some local boy, if any local boys remain. She'd have children, would work a farm if there were still farms to work, would probably be pregnant by 17, and have 4 or 5 children by 25, would age rapidly from hard work and constant childbearing, would look 40 by the time she was 30. In California, maybe things could be different. Maybe she could work, could save money, could eventually go back to school or learn a trade. Maybe the mere fact of being in a place with an economy, with opportunities, with possibilities beyond bare survival, would allow her to have something more than just the life her mother has had. She thinks about her mother, only 39 but looking much older, worn down by 15 years of farm life and 5 pregnancies and constant hard work. Mary had dreams once, Ruth knows. She'd been to normal school for a year, had thought about becoming a teacher before she met Tom and got married, and those dreams were set aside for the reality of being a farmer's wife. Is that what Ruth wants? to set aside dreams before they're fully formed, to accept limitation and confinement. But these thoughts make her feel guilty. Her mother has sacrificed everything for the family, has worked herself to exhaustion, and here's Ruth thinking her mother's life isn't good enough. It's not that her mother's life isn't good. It's that Ruth wants something different, wants possibilities that her mother never had. Is that selfish? Maybe, but it's also human. In the next room, Mary is still making her lists, but her mind is drifting to other concerns. She's thinking about what they'll tell people in California. Will they admit they're refugees from the Dust Bowl? Will they try to hide their origins, try to pass as normal migrants looking for work rather than as desperate Okies fleeing catastrophe? She's heard the stories about how Okies are treated, the contempt, the discrimination, the assumption that they're dirty and ignorant and somehow deserving of their misfortune. She's also worried about the children's health. Billy is still weak from his dust pneumonia. The journey will be hard on him, sleeping outdoors or in the truck, breathing dust from unpaved roads, inadequate nutrition. What if he gets sick again on the road? What if they're in the middle of nowhere with no doctor and no money? What if, and she barely lets herself think this, what if he doesn't survive the journey? And James is so young, only 3. Toddlers need stability, routine, safe places to play. He's going to spend weeks in a truck, confined and bored, and probably frightened by the strangeness of it all. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that his home is gone and they're going somewhere new and it's all going to be different and maybe better, but maybe not? Mary puts down her pencil and covers her face with her hands. She's not crying. She's too exhausted for tears, has cried so much over the past months that she's almost empty. She's just overwhelmed by the enormity of what they're attempting. They're taking 7 people with almost no money and inadequate supplies on a 2,000-mile journey across hostile terrain toward an uncertain destination where they'll know almost no one and have no guarantee of work or shelter or any kind of security. It's insane. It's desperate. It's probably the only choice they have, but that doesn't make it less terrifying. Tom comes in from the barn and finds Mary at the table, her face in her hands. He sits beside her and puts his arm around her shoulders. They sit together in silence for a while, not talking because there's nothing to say that would help. They're both scared. They're both doing this anyway because the alternative is worse. "We'll make it work," Tom finally says, though he doesn't sound convinced. "We have to," Mary replies, "because if we don't, what happens to the children?" That's what keeps them going. Not hope exactly, but responsibility. They're parents. They have 4 living children who depend on them completely. Whatever fears they have, whatever doubts plague them, they have to keep functioning because the children need them to. "I'm going to try to sleep," Tom says. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day, getting the truck, selling the horses, starting to load. We'll need to be rested." Mary nods, though she doubts she'll sleep much. But she puts away her lists and follows Tom to their bedroom, and they lie down in the bed they've shared for 15 years, and they try to rest. The night is not quiet. It never is anymore. The wind blows constantly, rattling windows, whistling through cracks in the walls, carrying dust that sifts through every barrier. The house creaks and groans. Somewhere outside, something loose is banging rhythmically. Maybe a shutter, maybe a piece of loose siding. The sounds are familiar, part of the constant background noise of living in the Dust Bowl, but tonight they seem louder, more ominous, as if the land itself is protesting their departure or mocking their attempt to escape. Tom lies awake, listening to the wind, thinking about his grandfather. John Henderson's father, Tom's great-grandfather, had fought in the Civil War, had come home to a devastated Missouri, had headed west looking for opportunity. He died before Tom was born, but Tom had heard the stories. A hard man, shaped by war, determined to make something of himself despite having started with nothing. His grandfather John, Tom's namesake, had inherited that determination. When the Land Run opened Oklahoma Territory to settlement in 1889, John Henderson was one of thousands who lined up at the border, waiting for the gunshot that would start the race. He'd run, literally run, to claim this quarter section, had beaten other claimants by minutes, had immediately started building his dugout so he could prove he was living on the claim. Those early years were brutal. living in a hole in the ground, breaking prairie sod with a hand plough, fighting drought and locusts and loneliness. But John Henderson persisted, and gradually the farm took shape. He married, had children including Tom's father, replaced the dugout with a real house, built a barn, acquired equipment. By the time Tom was born, the farm was established and reasonably prosperous. Tom's father had expanded it further, and Tom himself had modernised it in the 1920s when farming was profitable, and the future seemed bright. 3 generations of work, 3 generations of improvement, 3 generations of building something to pass on to the next generation. And now Tom is abandoning it, leaving it to be buried by dust, to decay and collapse, to disappear as if 3 generations of Hendersons had never existed here. The failure feels personal, feels like he's betraying his grandfather and father, betraying all the work they did to build this place. But what choice does he have? The land is dead. The topsoil is gone, blown away to Kansas and beyond. Even if rain returned tomorrow, which it won't, the land couldn't support crops anymore. The ecology is destroyed. It would take decades, maybe centuries to recover. They killed it. The farmers of the Great Plains killed their own land through ignorance and greed. They ploughed up the native grasses that held the soil in place. They planted wheat in soil that couldn't sustain continuous cultivation. They didn't rotate crops or let land lie fallow or practice any kind of conservation. They just exploited the land as hard and fast as they could, and now they're paying the price. Tom knows this intellectually, but emotionally he still feels like he's failed. Like he should have done something different, should have seen this coming, should have been smart enough or strong enough or lucky enough to avoid this catastrophe. It's not entirely rational. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody understood what they were doing to the land, but the guilt is there anyway. Mary lies beside him, also awake, also thinking. She's remembering the early years of their marriage, when things were good. Tom had been a handsome young farmer with prospects. The farm was doing well. They'd had a nice wedding, had moved into this house, had started their family with high hopes and reasonable confidence in the future. Ruth was born in 1917, right in the middle of the war when wheat prices were sky high and the future seemed limitless. Billy came in 1921, during the brief post-war recession, but still when times were basically good. They'd lost a baby in between, a little girl who lived only 3 days, never even named. But that was just one of those things that happened. Most families lost a child or two. Alma was born in 1925, right when the farm prosperity was peaking. They'd had money then, had bought nice things, had talked about expanding the house further. Tom had bought the car, a brand new 1927 Ford paying cash. They'd felt successful, felt like they were building something solid and permanent. James came in 1930, right when everything was starting to fall apart. The drought was beginning, wheat prices were collapsing, the depression was taking hold. Mary had known, even while pregnant with James, that the good times were over. She'd known they were heading into something bad. She hadn't known how bad it would get, hadn't imagined they'd end up abandoning everything and fleeing as refugees, but she'd known the direction things were heading. Now here they are, preparing to leave with almost nothing, heading toward a future that's completely uncertain. The best years of their marriage are behind them, those years in the 20s when they were young and prosperous and confident. What's ahead is just survival, just trying to keep the family together and keep the children fed and hoping that somehow, somewhere, things might eventually get better. She thinks about Dorothy, her sister in California. They've always been close despite the distance. Dorothy's letters have been encouraging but also realistic. Yes, there's work in California. No, it's not easy. Migrants live in camps, some run by the government, some just informal gatherings of desperate people. The work is seasonal and poorly paid. Californians resent the influx of Okies and treat them with contempt. It's not the promised land that the myth suggests. But it's California. Things grow there. It rains. There's an economy. There are opportunities. Maybe they'll struggle for years. Maybe they'll never be prosperous again. But at least they'll have a chance, which is more than they have in Oklahoma, where the land is dead and the economy is destroyed and there's literally nothing left. Mary finally drifts off to sleep sometime after midnight, exhausted beyond the ability to stay awake. Tom sleeps fitfully, waking repeatedly, each time momentarily disoriented before remembering where he is and what's happening. John Henderson, in his room, coughs through much of the night, his damaged lungs struggling with the dusty air. The children sleep more soundly, exhausted from the day's disruption and unaware of the full magnitude of what's coming. Morning comes early. Tom is up before dawn. Habit from decades of farm work makes early rising automatic. He goes outside into the pre-dawn darkness and stands looking at the sky. There's no storm building today, just the usual haze of suspended dust making the stars dim and the air taste gritty. The wind is blowing, as always, steady and relentless and maddening. He feeds the horses and the cow for what might be the last time, gives the chickens the last of their feed. These animals have been his responsibility, and he's taken care of them as well as he could given the circumstances. Now he's going to sell them, or give them away, and he feels like he's betraying that responsibility. But there's no alternative. After a quick breakfast, cornmeal mush and weak coffee, the same meal they've been eating for months, Tom saddles Daisy for the ride to Gaimon. Today he'll bring the truck home, sell the horses and cow if he can, and begin the actual loading process. "I'll be back by midday," he tells Mary. "Have the kids start gathering their things, put everything they're definitely taking in one place so we can see how much space it takes." The ride to Gaimon is quiet and lonely. Tom sees no other travellers this morning. The abandoned farms look even more desolate in the early light, shadows making the collapsed buildings look like ruins from some ancient civilization, rather than homes that were occupied just months ago. In Gaimon, the town is just waking up. Tom stops at the general store where Mr. Jenkins is opening up for the day. "Need to sell 2 horses and a milk cow," Tom says. "Know anyone buying?" Jenkins shakes his head. Market for livestock is non-existent. Everyone who's staying already has more animals than they can feed. Everyone who's leaving is trying to sell. Best bet is probably Bill Watson. He's got a small ranch west of town, hasn't been hit as hard by the dust. He might take them if the price is low enough. Bill Watson turns out to be a weathered man in his 50s who examines Tom's horses with a professional eye. "They're good animals," he acknowledges. "Healthy, well-trained. In normal times I'd give you 100 for the pair, but these aren't normal times. I'll give you 15 for both horses and the cow together." $15. Tom does the quick math. The horses are probably worth $75 in any reasonable market. The cow another $35. He's being offered 15 for all 3. It's robbery, but Watson is the only buyer and knows it. 20, Tom counters, more from principle than hope. 17.50? That's as high as I'll go. Take it or try your luck elsewhere, but I'm the only one in the county who's buying livestock. Tom takes it. He has no choice. Watson pays in cash, actual money, not credit or promises, and Tom has $17.50 more than he did this morning. Combined with the roughly $30 remaining from earlier, that gives them about $47 for the journey. Not enough, but more than they'd have otherwise. He says goodbye to Daisy and Caesar, which feels foolish. They're just animals they don't understand. But he does it anyway. These horses have worked alongside him for years, and now they're someone else's property. He hopes Watson treats them well. At Morrison's Used Cars, Frank has the truck ready. "Checked the oil and water this morning," Frank says. "Should be good to go. Remember what I told you. Check everything daily. Don't overheat it. Take your time." Tom drives the truck carefully back to his farm, learning its quirks and limitations. The steering is loose. You have to anticipate turns. The brakes need firm pressure. The engine sounds healthy, but has a slight knock at high RPMs, so Tom keeps the speed moderate. The suspension is rough, every bump and rut transmitting directly through the frame. But it runs, and that's what matters. He arrives home around midday to find the family has made progress on organising. In the yard are 3 piles. Items definitely being taken, items they hope to take if there's room, and items being abandoned. The definitely taking pile is distressingly small but still looks like more than will fit in the truck bed. They spend the afternoon test loading the truck. Tom has experience loading wagons efficiently, and those skills transfer, but the limitations become immediately apparent. They can stack things roughly 3 feet high before visibility over the load becomes a problem and the load becomes unstable. That means about 105 cubic feet of space, 7 feet long times 5 feet wide times 3 feet high. They start with essentials. The 3 mattresses they're definitely taking. Rolled up, they occupy significant space along one side. Boxes of clothes and shoes, stacked carefully. The cooking equipment, nested pots and pans, plates wrapped in cloth. Food supplies, flour sacks, bean sacks, canned goods. Water containers, 3 5-gallon cans that need to stay accessible. By the time they've loaded just these essentials, the truck is more than half full. Mary looks at what remains, the furniture she had hoped to take, the tools Tom wanted, the books and personal items, all the things that make life more than bare survival, and realises most of it won't fit. We need to be more ruthless, Tom says. Take only what we absolutely need to survive and what we absolutely can't replace. They unload and start over, cutting deeper. 4 mattresses becomes 3, then 2, with the understanding that children will share and some people will sleep on the ground. 3 outfits per person becomes 2 outfits per person, plus the clothes they're wearing. Books are cut ruthlessly. Even Ruth's 3 becomes 2, just the Bible and dictionary, Shakespeare abandoned with genuine grief. Furniture is abandoned completely except for one small table that can serve multiple purposes. Tools are harder because Tom's livelihood might depend on having the right tools when they arrive. He wants to take everything: saws, hammers, wrenches, hand tools, equipment. But space is limited. He keeps the most versatile, most essential tools and abandons the specialised ones, hoping he can acquire replacements later. By evening, after multiple loading attempts, they've achieved something that might work. A carefully packed truck bed with everything essential, nothing extra, arranged for stability and accessibility. Water containers are positioned where they can be reached. Food supplies are accessible but protected. Clothes and bedding are stacked securely. The 2 mattresses are rolled on top, where they'll cushion the ride for whoever sits on the load. 7 people, 1 truck, Mary says, looking at their arrangement. 4 in the cab, me, you, John and James on my lap. 3 in back, Ruth, Billy and Alma sitting on the load. It's not comfortable, but it's feasible. The children riding in back will be exposed to sun, dust and wind, but they're young and healthy, relatively, and should be able to handle it. John needs to be in the cab because his lungs are bad and the dust would be terrible for him. That evening they have their last dinner in the house, beans and the last of the cornbread, eaten mostly in silence. Everyone knows this is the last time they'll sit at this table, in this house, as residents rather than as people passing through. After dinner, neighbours start arriving. The few families that remain in the area come to say goodbye. The Stevensons from 3 miles north, the Johnsons from 2 miles west, the Mitchells from 4 miles south. Maybe 15 people total, the remnant of a community that used to be much larger. They gather in the yard because there's no space inside. People bring small parting gifts, a jar of preserves from the Mitchells, even though they can barely spare it, a spare tyre patch kit from the Stevensons, a hand-drawn map from the Johnsons showing good camping spots and water sources along Route 66. "How long you think you'll be gone?" asked Ed Stevenson, though it's a polite fiction. Everyone knows they're not coming back. "Don't know," Tom says. "Depends on what we find in California." "Might head that way ourselves before too long," Ed admits. "Can't last much longer here, barely hanging on." The conversation is stilted and uncomfortable because what do you say to people who are leaving forever? People you've known for years who are being forced out by circumstances beyond anyone's control. You want to offer encouragement, but you don't want to pretend everything will be fine. You want to acknowledge the tragedy, but you don't want to be morbid. So people end up saying very little, just standing together in the dusty twilight, sharing the moment. "You take care of yourself," Martha Johnson tells Mary, hugging her. "Right when you get settled, let us know how you're doing." Mary promises she will, though both women know the chances of maintaining correspondence are slim. Life in California will be too uncertain, too mobile, too precarious for regular letter writing. This might be the last time they see each other. The neighbours leave gradually as darkness falls, until finally the Hendersons are alone in the yard, looking at the loaded truck that represents their entire remaining existence. "We should try to sleep," Tom says. "We're leaving at dawn." They go inside one last time. The house looks strange, empty of most of its contents, echoing in a way it never did when it was full of furniture and people and life. Tom walks through the rooms, saying a silent goodbye to each space. The kitchen where they've eaten hundreds of meals, the bedroom where their children were born, the sitting room where the family gathered, all of it about to be abandoned. Mary does the same, touching walls, remembering moments. Ruth taking her first steps here, Billy recovering from scarlet fever in that bed, James learning to talk at that table. 15 years of life, 15 years of memories, all being left behind. Ruth is crying quietly in her room, trying not to let her parents hear. She's leaving the only home she's ever known, leaving friends, those few who remain, leaving the person she was and becoming someone new. It's frightening and sad, and also, though she feels guilty thinking it, a little bit exciting. She's going somewhere new, somewhere that might have possibilities her current life doesn't offer. The younger children are already asleep, exhausted from the day's activity. Tom and Mary lie down for a few hours of rest, though neither sleeps well. Every sound seems significant. The wind, the creaking house, the distant howl of a coyote. These are the last sounds they'll hear as residents of this place. Tom wakes before dawn, as he has nearly every day of his adult life. But this morning is different. This is the last morning he'll wake up in this house, on this land. He rises and dresses in the darkness, then walks through the house one final time. Everything they're leaving, and it's almost everything, will slowly be buried by dust, destroyed by weather, forgotten. In a few years, this house might be just a low mound in the landscape, all evidence of human habitation erased. He goes outside and watches the sky lighten. Dawn comes slowly, the sun rising over a landscape that looks dead, hostile, alien. The wind is already blowing, it never really stops, and the air tastes of dust. This is what they're leaving. A dying land, a collapsed economy, a destroyed way of life. Mary wakes the children. "Time to go," she says quietly. They dress in the pre-dawn darkness, putting on their travelling clothes, sturdy, practical outfits that will serve for days of riding in the truck. James is confused and fussy, not understanding why they're waking him before sunrise. Billy's excited despite his weakness. This is an adventure to him. Alma is quiet, processing. Ruth is red-eyed but composed. They eat a quick breakfast, the last food from the house, bread and the last of the coffee. Then they begin the final loading. The bedding they slept in last night, the dishes they just used, the last-minute items that couldn't be packed earlier. Everything is secured, tied down, checked one more time. Tom does a final walk around the property. The barn stands empty now, the animals sold or given away. The fields stretch barren and dusty to the horizon. The fences are half buried in drift. The garden is dead. Everything looks desolate, abandoned, finished. He finds his father standing by the fence, looking out at the land he claimed 44 years ago. John Henderson is crying quietly, tears running down his weathered face. He doesn't try to hide it or wipe them away. What's the point? "Ready?" Tom asks gently. "No," John says, "but we're going anyway." They walk back to the truck together. The family's gathered around it waiting. 7 people, everything they own, about to drive away from everything they've known. Tom takes one last look at the house. He thinks about his grandfather, about his father, about the 3 generations who've worked this land. He thinks about what they built here and what they're losing. He thinks about the failure and the guilt and the overwhelming sadness of leaving. But he also thinks about his children, about their future, about the fact that staying means dying. He thinks about California, about the possibility, however slim, of starting over, of building something new, of giving his family a chance at survival. "Let's go," he says. Mary and James and John get in the cab. Ruth, Billy and Alma climb onto the loaded truck bed, settling as comfortably as they can on the mattresses. Tom starts the engine. It catches on the second try, running rough for a moment, then settling into a steady rhythm. He puts it in gear, releases the clutch, and the truck starts moving. They drive slowly down the dirt road that leads away from the farm. Tom looks in the mirror, watching the house recede behind them. Mary is crying quietly, trying not to let James see. John stares straight ahead, his face set in lines of grief and determination. At the end of their road, Tom stops and looks back one final time. The house, the barn, the fields, all of it visible in the distance, already looking abandoned and forgotten. This is the last time he'll see it. This is goodbye. He He turns onto the main road heading north toward Liberal, Kansas and Route 66. They're joining the exodus now, becoming part of the great migration of Dust Bowl refugees fleeing west. They're Okies now, dispossessed, desperate, searching for survival in a place they've never seen. As they drive away, the sun breaks over the horizon, illuminating the dusty landscape in harsh morning light. The wind continues to blow, carrying away more of the precious topsoil, slowly erasing what remains. The farm behind them will slowly collapse and be buried. In a few years, someone passing by might not even know there was ever a farm there, might see only a low mound in the landscape that could be mistaken for a natural feature rather than the grave of 3 generations' dreams. But the Hendersons won't see that. They'll be in California, trying to build new lives, trying to survive, trying to give their children a future. Whether they'll succeed or fail, whether California will be better or worse than Oklahoma, whether the journey itself will break them or make them stronger, all of that remains to be seen. For now, they're just driving. Mile after mile, dust swirling behind them, the future uncertain but at least existing, at least possible. They're moving towards something rather than passively waiting for death. And that's all they can do. Keep moving, keep trying, keep hoping that somewhere ahead things might be better than what they're leaving behind. The Dust Bowl has claimed their land, has destroyed their way of life, has forced them into exile. But it hasn't killed them yet. They're survivors, refugees, American migrants fleeing American disaster, joining thousands of others in the same desperate flight. This is the reality of the Dust Bowl, not just dust storms and drought, but human displacement on a massive scale. Not just an environmental disaster, but a social and economic catastrophe that destroyed communities, separated families, turned productive farmers into impoverished migrants. And it was preventable. If farmers had understood what ploughing up the prairie grass would do to the soil, if there had been conservation practices, if people had been less greedy, less focused on short-term profit, more willing to work with the land rather than exploiting it. If. But they didn't understand, and now a generation is paying the price. The Henderson family drives north through the Oklahoma panhandle, through landscape that looks more like a desert than the grassland it once was. They pass other families also heading west, a steady stream of refugees, all carrying their lives in loaded trucks and cars, all fleeing the same disaster, all hoping California will be better. By midday, they've reached Liberal, Kansas and join Route 66. The highway is busier than they expected, traffic moving both directions but mostly west, mostly refugees like themselves. They see license plates from Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, Missouri, all the Dust Bowl states, all sending their displaced people west toward an uncertain future. They stop briefly for lunch, pulling off the road and eating from their supplies. The children are already tired of sitting, already uncomfortable. It's going to be a long journey. As they drive through the afternoon, Tom thinks about what they're doing. They're abandoning land that 3 generations worked. They're giving up on farming, on the identity and livelihood that defined them. They're becoming refugees, migrants, people without roots or place. It feels like failure, like surrender, like giving up. But what choice did they have? The land is dead. Staying would have meant watching their children slowly starve, watching John Henderson die of dust pneumonia, watching the bank foreclose and losing everything anyway, but with no resources left to start over. So they're doing what humans have always done when faced with catastrophe. They're moving, migrating, searching for better conditions. They're following the same impulse that brought people across the Bering Land Bridge thousands of years ago, that sent pioneers westward in wagon trains, that made Tom's grandfather run in the land run. When where you are becomes uninhabitable, you go somewhere else. It's not failure. It's survival. Mary, holding James, who's finally asleep despite the truck's rough ride, thinks about Dorothy, her sister in Bakersfield. She's pinning so much hope on Dorothy's help, on having someone in California who knows them, who might be able to guide them, help them find work, give them advice. But she's also afraid Dorothy will be unable or unwilling to help, afraid they'll arrive and find themselves completely on their own in a strange place. The letter Tom mailed should arrive in a few days. Dorothy will know they're coming, will hopefully be able to prepare. But there are so many unknowns. Where will they live when they first arrive? How will they find work? How will they feed the family while searching for employment? What if California is as bad as Oklahoma, just in different ways? These questions circle in Mary's mind without answers. All she can do is keep going, keep functioning, keep taking care of her children and hoping that somehow things will work out. As evening approaches, they start looking for a place to camp. Frank Morrison told Tom about designated camping areas along Route 66 where migrants can stop. Places with water sources, sometimes with primitive facilities. They find one just outside of Guyman, Kansas. Not the Oklahoma Guyman where Tom bought the truck, but a different town with the same name. The camp is a large open area off the highway where maybe 20 other families are already stopped for the night. There are trucks and cars and even a few wagons, all loaded with possessions, all heading west. People are setting up camps, building fires, cooking meals, arranging places to sleep. Tom pulls into an empty spot and they begin to set up their own camp. It's a process they'll repeat night after night for the next few weeks. Unload what's needed for the evening, build a fire, cook dinner, arrange sleeping areas, try to rest despite discomfort and uncertainty. Ruth helps her mother cook while Tom gathers firewood. Billy and Alma explore the camp, looking at other families, other refugees like themselves. James clings to Mary, unsettled by the strangeness of everything. Dinner is simple. Beans heated over the fire, bread from their supplies, weak coffee. They eat sitting on the ground, using the small table they brought as a surface for food preparation. Other families around them are doing the same. Variations on the same basic meal. The same basic struggle to maintain some semblance of a normal life under abnormal circumstances. After dinner, Tom talks with other men in the camp, exchanging information about the road ahead. Arizona desert is the hardest part, one man says. Hot, dry, long stretches with no water. Make sure your radiator is in good shape or you'll overheat. California's not what people say, another man warns. Work's scarce, wages are terrible, and locals hate us. Called us Okies like it's an insult. They blame us for everything. Taking jobs, spreading disease, lowering standards. Some towns won't even let migrants camp within city limits. This information is discouraging, but not surprising. Tom has heard similar warnings. Still, hearing it from people who've already been to California makes it more real, more frightening. As darkness falls, the camp quiets. Families settle into their sleeping arrangements. The Hendersons have 2 mattresses spread on the ground. One for John, one for Mary, and the 3 youngest children. Tom and Ruth will sleep on blankets on the ground, which is uncomfortable but manageable. Lying on the hard ground, looking up at stars dimmed by dust in the atmosphere, Tom thinks about where they are and where they're going. They're one day into a journey that will take weeks. They're already uncomfortable, already tired, and it's only the first night. How will they manage for 20 more nights, or 30, or however long it takes? But people do manage. All around them, families are making the same journey, dealing with the same hardships. Some will fail. Trucks will break down beyond repair. Money will run out. Families will fracture under the pressure. But others will make it to California, will find work, will survive and maybe eventually prosper. The Hendersons will be one or the other. They'll either make it or they won't. But at least they're trying. At least they have a chance. That's more than they would have had staying in Oklahoma, watching everything slowly die. As Tom drifts towards sleep, he thinks about the farm they've left behind. By now, dust is probably already accumulating in the empty house. The wind is probably already starting to strip away the last paint, to work at the weakened boards, to begin the process of decay that will eventually reduce the house to rubble and then to dust itself. 3 generations built that farm. 1 environmental disaster destroyed it. That's the lesson of the Dust Bowl, that human civilization is more fragile than we like to think, that we can destroy in decades what took millennia to build, that our cleverness and technology don't protect us from the consequences of our ignorance. But it's also a lesson in human resilience. The Dust Bowl destroyed farms and displaced hundreds of thousands of people, but most of those people survived. They fled west, they rebuilt their lives, they adapted. The human capacity to endure, to adapt, to keep trying even after catastrophic failure. That's also part of the Dust Bowl story. The Henderson family will be part of that story. Whether their particular story has a happy ending or a tragic one, whether they thrive in California or merely survive, they're part of the great American story of migration and adaptation and endurance. The wind continues to blow across the Oklahoma Panhandle, carrying away more topsoil, slowly erasing what remains of the farm country that used to be there. The Henderson farm stands empty, abandoned, already beginning its slow collapse. In a few years, it will be just a memory. In a few more, even the memory will fade. But the Hendersons themselves won't fade. They'll be in California, living new lives, creating new memories, building new futures. The land betrayed them. The economy destroyed them. The drought displaced them. But they survived. They kept going. They found a way forward. That's the real story of the Dust Bowl, not just destruction but survival, not just loss but adaptation, not just the end of one way of life but the beginning of another. The Hendersons are refugees now, but they won't be refugees forever. They'll become Californians, will eventually belong to their new place, will create new identities and new lives. The journey will be hard. California will be hard. But hard is different from impossible. And after what they've been through, watching their land die, watching their livelihood disappear, facing the decision to abandon everything, they know they can endure hard things. They have to because their children are counting on them. Because giving up means dying. Because humans are built to survive even when survival seems impossible. And so they sleep, restlessly, uncomfortably, on hard ground in a refugee camp in Kansas, one day into a journey that will take them across a continent, away from everything they've known, toward everything uncertain. Tomorrow they'll wake up and drive again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until finally they reach California and discover what fate has waiting for them there. The American dream brought them to Oklahoma, the promise of land, of prosperity, of building something permanent. The Dust Bowl destroyed that dream. Now they're chasing a different dream, harder and less certain, but still a dream. The dream of survival, of starting over, of giving their children a chance at a future. It's not the dream they wanted, but it's the dream they have. And they'll pursue it with all the determination, all the resilience, all the desperate hope they can muster. Because what else can they do? Give up? Lie down and die? That's not in their nature. They're Hendersons, they're Americans, they're survivors. And so, despite everything, they keep going. The truck will carry them west. The road will take them to California, and somehow, some way, they'll find a way to keep living, keep trying, keep hoping for better days ahead. That's all anyone can do, keep going, keep trying, keep hoping, even when hope seems foolish, even when the odds are terrible, even when everything you've worked for is gone and the future is completely uncertain, you keep going anyway. Because you're human, and humans endure.